Okay, picture this. You're standing there trying to decide, do you grab that small, immediate reward right now?
Yeah.
Or do you wait, work towards something bigger but further in the future? This fundamental challenge, valuing future rewards, it's something our brains wrestle with constantly.
And it's a core problem that uh, the field of reinforcement learning, or RL, tries to solve.
Mm.
Whether you're talking about training an AI agent or understanding how animals learn, RL gives us a powerful framework.
Right.
The standard idea is that an agent learns the value of a state or an action
Mm.
based on the rewards it expects to get, down the line.
Right. And the classic way RL handles future rewards is by, well, discounting them.
Mm.
Like a dimmer switch for time rewards further away are worth less than rewards closer.
Mm.
In the standard models, this discount happens exponentially, controlled by just one factor, usually called gamma. High gamma, you care a lot about the future. Low gamma, you're focused on right now. Yeah.
Exactly. A single gamma shrinking future value exponentially. It's mathematically simple, super useful for algorithms, and for a long time, it's been a key idea for understanding dopamine neurons, too.
Because they're thought to signal reward prediction errors,
Right.
the difference between expected and actual rewards.
That's the idea. Those prediction errors are crucial.
So the classic view, single timescale exponential discounting may be mapped onto dopamine. But here's the puzzle. While that's neat mathematically, if you look at how humans and animals actually choose,
Yeah.
it often looks less like exponential and more like hyperbolic discounting.
Right. The steep drop-off early, then slower later.
Exactly. It's a behavioral pattern that's been, well, kind of hard to square with that simple single gamma model.
But in that mismatch, that's a big clue that maybe something's missing from the standard picture.
Okay.
Which brings us to the really fascinating research we're diving into today. It's a paper by Paul Massett and colleagues. And they ask, what if biological RL isn't limited to just one timescale?
You mean not just one way of looking at the future?
Exactly. What if the brain processes future rewards across multiple timescales all at once?
And the punchline, because there's always a punchline.
The punchline is they found pretty surprising evidence suggesting dopamine neurons in the brain are actually set up to do just that. It challenges, but also really enriches our classic view of dopamine.
Okay, interesting. So this deep dive is all about unpacking that, why multiple timescales might be powerful, and the evidence from the brain itself.
That's the plan. We'll look at the computational side, then the biology, how dopamine neuron diversity might be the key.
Okay, let's start with the standard view, just to be clear. You said value V is the expected sum of future rewards, discounted. The formula was VS equals ESIM gamma cert, right?
Yep, that's the one. Gamma to the power of t times the rad at time t, all summed up, simple, clean.
Mathematically convenient, you said.
Right, makes algorithms like TD learning work beautifully.
Yeah.
But then there's that gap you mentioned between this elegance and, well, messy reality, the hyperbolic behavior.
And the paper points out a key limitation of just using one timescale. What gets lost when you boil down that whole future stream of rewards into just one number? V's.
What gets lost is the temporal information, specifically independent of the reward size.
How so?
The paper uses a simple example. It's in their figure 1A. If a state has a high value, calculated with just one gamma, does that mean you expect a small reward really soon? Or a much bigger reward, but, way further out?
Right.
With just one value, you can't tell the difference. Timing and magnitude are like tangled up, confounded.
That seems pretty important. Losing the when? So how does the multi-timescale idea fix this?
So the core idea, it's actually pretty simple but powerful. Instead of learning just one value VVs, the agent learns a whole vector of values.
A vector. Like a list.
Exactly, like VB1, V2, VV, and N. And each V is the value calculated using a different discount factor, a different gamma. So you have one value calculated with a really short-sighted gamma, another with a slightly longer view, all the way up to a value using a very far-sighted gamma. You get a whole spectrum of perspectives on the future.
So instead of one number, a list of numbers, each from a different temporal viewpoint, why is that list so much better?
Okay, here's where it gets really cool. The paper shows that this vector of values across different discount factors, it's mathematically related to something called the V-transform.
Okay, that sounds technical.
It is a bit, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a discrete version of the Laplace transform. But the key thing is this kind of transform is invertible. Meaning, if you have that vector of values across enough different discount factors, you can actually work backwards. You can decode and reconstruct the expected temporal profile of future rewards. You can figure out when the rewards are likely to arrive, not just their total discounted sum.
Whoa, so the pattern of values across that spectrum of discounts, that's like a fingerprint of the future reward timeline.
Exactly.
And that tells you about timing, separate from magnitude.
Precisely. Their figure 1b shows this nicely. The vector shape for a reward coming soon looks different from the vector shape for a reward coming later. That shape carries the timing. And if you scale the reward up or down, all the values in the vector scale proportionally, but the shape stays the same.
So it inherently disentangles timing and magnitude.
That's the claim. It's a really powerful representation.
That's a big shift conceptually. Okay, makes sense mathematically. But what can you actually do with this richer info? The paper showed some computational advantages in simulations, right? Figure 2.
Yes, they did. They built agents that learned with multiple timescales and showed they could do things single timescale agents struggle with.
Like task 1, figure 2c, reporting reward timing separately from magnitude.
Exactly. The single timescale agent gets confused, its value mixes them up. But the multi-timescale agent just looks at the pattern across its values, and it can pull out the timing info accurately, even if the reward size changes.
Okay. And task 2, figure 2pin, that tackles the behavioral mismatch, showing they can handle non-exponential discounting, like hyperbolic.
Yes. This is super interesting, because the multi-timescale agent can reconstruct the expected timeline of rewards, ERT.
Right from that vector.
It can then take that timeline and apply any discount function at once, exponential, hyperbolic, something totally weird. It just weights the reconstructed timeline differently.
Whereas the single timescale agent is stuck with its one exponential curve.
Fundamentally, yes.
So wait, the capacity for hyperbolic-like behavior could actually emerge from an agent learning with multiple exponentials?
That's the implication. By reconstructing the time expectations first, then applying a different weighting. It's a potential mechanism.
Okay, what about learning speed? Task 3, figure 2e, they could infer timing even before learning fully converged.
Yeah, another cool advantage. Even early on, when the exact value estimates are still a bit fuzzy, the shape of the value function across the different discounts already gives you a pretty good hint about how far away rewards are.
So it gets temporal information faster.
Relatively quickly, yes, just by looking at the pattern across its different gammas before everything is perfectly learned.
And task 4, figure 2, state-dependent discounts. Myopic bias. Sounds like the agent can change its focus.
Exactly. Think about it. Maybe you're in a state where the big reward is miles away. You need patience, a large gamma perspective.
Okay.
But then you move somewhere else. The reward is right there, and maybe there's lots of future noise you want to ignore. A short-sighted, myopic gamma might be better there, acting like a regularizer.
A single timescale agent is stuck.
Right. But the multi-timescale agent has this whole toolkit of perspectives. It can effectively attend to the timescale that's most useful for the current state or situation. They show this helps in tasks with different information availability.
So computationally, this vector thing, multiple timescales, is powerful. Robust timing info, flexibility with discount functions, faster inference, adaptable focus, huge advantages. But does the brain actually do this?
Ah, the crucial question. So the paper shifts gears and looks for biological evidence, specifically at dopamine neurons, the ones doing that prediction error signaling.
How they test it in the brain.
They used mice, and they recorded activity from dopamine neurons in the VTA. That's a key dopamine hub in the midbrain.
Oh, okay.
And they used optogenetics to make sure they were actually recording from dopamine cells, which is important. The mice were doing tasks involving delayed rewards.
Got it. The first experiment was a cued delay task. Figure 3a. Mice learned different smells predicted water reward after different delays.
Yep, 4 specific delays from under a second to over 9 seconds. And the mice learned this, they actually waited longer to start licking when the delay was longer. So they knew the timing.
Behaviorally, they got it.
Now, when they looked at the dopamine response to the cue, the smell, on average, it decreased as the predicted delay got longer.
Which makes sense, right? Further reward, lower value, smaller prediction error at the cue. Standard RL stuff.
Exactly. That matched expectations.
Yeah.
But the key finding, the real surprise, came when they looked at individual dopamine neurons.
What happened then?
Huge diversity. When they looked neuron by neuron, they saw a massive variation in how steeply their response dropped off as the delay increased.
So some neurons only cared about really soon rewards, and their response plummeted for longer delays.
Yeah, exactly. And others had a much gentler slope. They still responded pretty well, even if the reward was like 9 seconds away. A whole range.
This diversity, does it map onto different discount factors? Like some neurons are gamma at 0.9, others are gamma at 0.5?
That's precisely what they hypothesized. And they tested it. They fitted the response curve of each individual neuron across the different delays.
Hmm.
And here's a really critical point. For the single neurons, the exponential decay model actually fit the data much better than the hyperbolic model.
Wait, really? So individual neurons look exponential, even though overall behavior often looks hyperbolic.
That's what their fit suggested, yeah. Which is fascinating.
And the population showed a whole spectrum of these inferred exponential gammas, figure 3 Ju.
Exactly. A wide distribution, some very myopic, low gamma, some
Yeah.
very far-sighted, high gamma, and lots in between.
Okay, but is this diversity just like random variation, or does it mean something?
That's what they tested next. They showed it wasn't random. The pattern of activity across the whole population of recorded neurons for each Q delay, it was distinct and structured. Different patterns for different delays.
Ah, like the vector idea from before.
Exactly. If each neuron is tuned to a different exponential timescale, then the collective response of the population should contain the information needed to reconstruct the timing, like a biological Z-transform.
And could they actually decode the timing from the population activity, figures 3JK?
Yes, this was, I think, a really elegant part of the paper. They used a decoding method based on that inverse transform idea. They treated the population activity pattern as the multi-timescale vector and tried to recover the original timing signal.
And did it work?
It worked remarkably well. They could decode which of the 4 delays was cued with high accuracy, just based on the pattern of activity across these diverse dopamine neurons. And crucially, if they shuffled the neuron identities in the decoder, basically scrambling the pattern, the decoding failed, which proves it's the specific, structured diversity across the population that carries the temporal code.
So the diversity isn't noise, it is the signal for time. That's quite something.
And what's really compelling is that this same multi-timescale idea also helps explain another slightly puzzling dopamine phenomena, ramping activity.
Ramping. You mean how dopamine sometimes gradually increases as an animal gets closer to a reward, like in figure 4B?
Exactly that. They saw this in their second experiment too. Mice moving along a virtual reality track towards a reward at the end.
Okay.
Dopamine often ramps up. But again, when they looked at individual neurons, they saw lots of diversity in these ramps. Some ramped up, some ramped down, some had these weird non-monotonic shapes.
Huh. Down. How does the multi-timescale idea explain that kind of diversity?
Well, think about the prediction error signal again. TD errors are roughly the reward, plus the discounted value of the next state, minus the value of the current state. Now, imagine the underlying value function is increasing as the mouse gets closer to the reward, but maybe not perfectly exponentially. If different neurons are calculating this prediction error using their own distinct discount factors, gammas, then their prediction error signal, the ramp shape, will naturally look different depending on their specific gamma. A neuron with a small gamma, short time scale, might show a different pattern of error over time compared to a neuron with a large gamma, long time scale, as the underlying value changes.
So the shape of the ramp depends on the neuron's personal gamma interacting with the shape of the value function itself.
That's the explanation they propose, yeah.
Yeah.
The diversity in ramps emerges naturally from the interaction between a common changing value function and the neuron's specific discount factors used to calculate the prediction error. It explains ups, downs, everything.
Okay, so both the quick cue responses and the slower ramps both seem consistent with this idea of individual dopamine neurons having different, maybe fixed discount factors.
Which leads to the next obvious and really important question.
Is the discount factor fixed? Is it like a permanent property of that neuron? Or does it change depending on what the animal is doing?
Exactly. Is it cell-specific or context-dependent? That's crucial for understanding how this whole system is implemented biologically.
So how did they test that?
This is pretty clever. They managed to record from the exact same dopamine neurons, 43 of them in the same mice, while the mice performed both tasks on the same day.
Both the cue delay task and the VR ramp task.
Yep. 2 completely different tasks, different ways of engaging with time and reward.
And what did they find? Did a neuron that acted far-sighted in the cue task also act far-sighted in the ramp task?
They found a significant correlation. The discount factors they inferred for individual neurons in the cue task were correlated with the factors inferred for those same neurons in the ramp task.
Wow. Okay,
Yeah.
that's strong evidence.
It really is. It strongly suggests that a neuron's preferred time scale, or at least its rank, whether it's relatively myopic or far-sighted compared to its neighbors, is likely a stable cell-specific property.
Not something that just flips around for every new situation.
Probably not dramatically, no. which implies the brain might implement this multi-timescale system not by having neurons constantly retune themselves, but by having this built-in diversity, this population of specialists.
And then maybe downstream areas learn to read out or weight the signals from different specialists depending on the task demands?
That's a very plausible downstream mechanism.
Yeah.
It constrains how we think about the biological implementation.
Okay, let's zoom out. Big picture implications. What does all this mean?
Well, first, it offers a potential way to bridge that gap we started with the exponential model versus hyperbolic behavior.
Right.
This paper suggests that even if individual dopamine neurons discount exponentially, the collective signal from a diverse population, when read out and combined by downstream circuits, could absolutely generate behavior that looks hyperbolic at the organism level.
So the population code enables non-exponential evaluation.
It provides the raw material for it, yes. It reconciles the single neuron finding with the behavioral data. Second, it gives us a much richer way to think about dopamine heterogeneity. All that diversity people see isn't just noise or random variation.
It's functional. It's encoding time.
Exactly. It's not just a single scalar prediction error. It's more like a parameterized vector prediction error, carrying much richer information, including that future temporal profile, like a biological Laplace transform of expected rewards.
And connecting this to, say, problems in decision-making, like impulsivity or apathy.
Yeah, the paper touches on this in the discussion. If this system, this distribution of discount factors across neurons, gets miscalibrated, maybe someone has way too many myopic neurons or not enough farsighted ones due to genetics or disease, that could plausibly lead to biases in temporal valuation. Too much focus on the now, leading to impulsivity, or maybe an inability to properly value distant goals, contributing to apathy or lack of motivation.
Provides a potential circuit-level mechanism for those kinds of issues.
It's speculative, but a compelling link, yeah. And then, of course, there are implications for AI.
How so? Biological inspiration.
Definitely. Building AI agents that learn using parallel multi-timescale prediction errors, like they suggest with auxiliary tasks in Figure 2G, could be a really powerful strategy. It might make AI more robust, flexible, and maybe better at handling complex environments where timing and uncertainty are critical.
So bringing this all together, the old view of dopamine just signaling one simple prediction error, probably too simple.
Seems that way.
This work by Massett and colleagues paints a much richer picture. Dopamine neurons might be encoding this complex multi-timescale signal about future rewards. The diversity across the population is key.
Yeah, with individual neurons potentially tuned to specific time horizons, and maybe that tuning is even a stable property of the cell itself.
It helps bridge theory and biology, explains weird dopamine activity, and gives us new ways to think about behavior, maybe even dysfunction.
And AI design, too. It's a really thought-provoking shift in perspective.
It really is. Understanding how our brains actually represent and value the future across all these different timescales, it could change how we think about basic decisions, motivation, even conditions like addiction or depression where valuation goes wrong.
It's not just if or how much we want something, but when we expect it and how that when is mapped across this whole internal spectrum of time perspectives.
Makes you think, doesn't it, about your own internal discount factors. When you choose between, I don't know, saving for the long term versus spending now, or putting in the effort for a future goal versus just relaxing, could the push and pull you feel reflect the balance or imbalance of these different timescale signals deep inside your own brain? That hidden diversity might be driving the complexity of our choices every single day.